You tell yourself you'll start in 5 minutes. Just 5. Enough time to scroll a little, to check something small, to feel ready. But 5 minutes turns into 30, then an hour. Then suddenly the day feels heavier than it should. The task is still there, untouched, quietly waiting. And with every passing moment, it grows not in size, but in weight. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we delay the very things we know matter? Why do we avoid what we've already decided is important? And maybe the most uncomfortable question of all, if we understand the consequences, why don't we change? Procrastination is often misunderstood as laziness, but that explanation is far too simple. Laziness suggests a lack of care, a lack of desire. But procrastination usually lives in people who care deeply. People who think, who plan, who imagine better versions of themselves. It lives in the gap between intention and action, and that gap is not empty. It is filled with emotion. At its core, procrastination is not a time problem. It is an emotional regulation problem. When you sit down to begin something meaningful, your mind does something subtle. It scans the task not just for difficulty, but for how it makes you feel. Does it feel overwhelming? Uncertain? Boring? Does it trigger doubt, pressure, or the quiet fear that you might fail? If the emotional cost feels too high, your brain looks for relief. That relief often comes in the form of distraction. Scrolling, watching, organizing, overthinking, these are not random choices. They are emotional escape routes. They offer something immediate, comfort, control, or at least the illusion of both. In that moment, your brain prioritizes feeling better now over benefiting later. But here's the hidden cost. Every time you delay, the task doesn't disappear. It lingers. And as it lingers, it becomes heavier. Not because the task itself has changed, but because your relationship with it has. What once felt like a simple action begins to feel like pressure. Pressure turns into guilt. Guilt turns into avoidance. And avoidance reinforces the idea that the task is something to fear. This is how procrastination feeds itself. It is not just the act of delaying. It is the emotional loop that strengthens each time you delay. Have you ever noticed how a small task can feel enormous after you've put it off for days? Why does something that would take 20 minutes suddenly feel like it requires all your energy? It's not the task you're avoiding anymore. It's the feeling attached to it. And that feeling is often tied to something deeper than the task itself. Sometimes it's fear of failure. Not just failing the task, but what that failure might say about you. If you try and don't succeed, what does that mean? Does it challenge the image you have of yourself? Does it expose a weakness you'd rather not confront? Other times it's perfectionism. You don't just want to complete the task. You want to do it perfectly. You want it to be impressive, meaningful, flawless. And because perfection feels so far away from where you are now, starting becomes intimidating. So you wait. You tell yourself you'll begin when you feel more ready, more focused, more inspired. But that moment rarely arrives on its own. And so the cycle continues. There's also the quiet role of identity in procrastination. The way you see yourself influences how you act. If somewhere deep inside you believe you are someone who struggles with discipline, someone who always procrastinates, that belief shapes your behavior more than you might realize. You begin to act in alignment with that identity, even if it frustrates you. So ask yourself this. When you procrastinate, what story are you telling yourself about who you are? Are you someone who can handle discomfort, or someone who avoids it? Are you someone who follows through, or someone who waits for the perfect moment? These questions are not meant to judge you. They are meant to reveal something important. Procrastination is not just about what you do, but about how you see yourself. And the way you see yourself can change. Overcoming procrastination does not begin with forcing yourself to work harder. It begins with understanding what you're actually resisting. What is it about the task that feels uncomfortable? Is it confusion because you don't know where to start? Is it pressure because the outcome matters too much? Is it boredom because the task feels meaningless? Or is it fear, quiet, persistent fear that you might not be as capable as you hope? When you identify the real source of resistance, the task begins to shift. It becomes less of a vague burden and more of a specific challenge. And specific challenges are easier to face. There is also something powerful about starting small. Not in a motivational, surface-level way, but in a deeply practical sense. When a task feels overwhelming, your brain sees it as a threat. The larger it appears, the more resistance you feel. But when you reduce the entry point, when you make the first step almost effortless, you lower that resistance. Instead of telling yourself to complete everything, you focus on beginning. Just opening the document. Just writing a single sentence. Just working for 5 minutes. It sounds almost too simple to matter. But the act of starting changes something internally. It breaks the pattern of avoidance. It creates momentum, even if it's small. And momentum has a way of growing. Another important shift is learning to separate your feelings from your actions. You don't need to feel motivated to begin. This idea can feel counterintuitive because we often wait for motivation as if it's a prerequisite for action. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes, often depending on how we feel in the moment. Discipline, on the other hand, is built on a different principle. It is the ability to act even when you don't feel like it. That doesn't mean ignoring your emotions completely. It means recognizing that your emotions are temporary, while your actions have lasting impact. You can feel unmotivated and still take a step forward. You can feel uncertain and still begin. You can feel resistance and still move through it. And each time you do, you weaken the hold that procrastination has on you. There is also a deeper layer to consider. How you treat yourself when you procrastinate. Do you respond with frustration, calling yourself lazy or undisciplined? Do you compare yourself to others who seem more productive, more consistent? Or do you pause long enough to understand what happened? Self-criticism might feel like accountability, but it often makes procrastination worse. It adds another layer of negative emotion, which your brain then tries to escape, leading you right back into avoidance. What if, instead, you approached procrastination with curiosity? Not to excuse it, but to understand it. What was I feeling in that moment? What made the task seem difficult? What could I change next time? This shift in perspective turns procrastination from a personal flaw into a pattern you can observe and adjust. And patterns can be changed. The environment you place yourself in also matters more than you might think. Distractions are not just external, they are designed to capture your attention. Your phone, your notifications, the endless stream of content available at any moment, these are powerful forces. Expecting yourself to rely purely on willpower in that environment is unrealistic. Sometimes overcoming procrastination is less about strengthening your mind and more about shaping your surroundings. What happens when you remove the easiest distractions? What happens when you create a space that encourages focus instead of pulling you away from it? Small changes in your environment can reduce the friction between you and the work you need to do. And then there is the question of meaning. Why does this task matter to you? Not in a vague, external sense, but in a personal one. If a task feels disconnected from your values, your goals, or your identity, it becomes easier to avoid. But when you connect your actions to something deeper, something that genuinely matters to you, the resistance often decreases. You're no longer just completing a task. You're moving towards something meaningful. But even with all of this understanding, there will still be days when you procrastinate. That's part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate procrastination completely. It is to reduce its control over your life, to shorten the time between intention and action, to recognize the patterns earlier and respond differently. Progress, not perfection. So the next time you find yourself delaying something important, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what am I actually avoiding right now? Is it the task or the feeling attached to it? And then ask a second question, one that shifts your focus forward. What is the smallest step I can take right now? Not later. Not when you feel ready. Right now. Because overcoming procrastination is not about transforming your entire life in one moment. It is about choosing again and again to move forward despite discomfort. And with each small step, you change something deeper than your schedule. You change your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust that you can follow through. You begin to see that action is possible, even when it feels difficult. And slowly, almost quietly, the gap between who you want to be and how you actually live begins to close. So let me leave you with this. If you already know what matters to you, if you already understand the cost of waiting, then what are you really waiting for? And how much longer are you willing to let hesitation decide the direction of your life? If this made you pause and think even for a moment, don't just scroll past it. Take a second and be honest with yourself. What's something you've been putting off lately, and why? Is it really about time? Or is there something deeper you've been avoiding? If this resonated with you, like it so more people can see it, and share it with someone who might need this reminder right now. And I'd really like to hear from you. Leave a comment and share your experience. What do you usually procrastinate on the most? What do you feel in that moment when you choose to delay? And have you ever managed to break out of that cycle, even briefly? Your story might help someone else realize they're not alone, and sometimes that's exactly what they need to take their first step forward.